Hey everyone, welcome back. We are in chapter 23, blood vessels, specifically the circulatory pathways set of slides, not the histology one. We did that previously. We just went over pulmonary circulation. We're now going to go over coronary circulation, which is a part of the systemic circulation, because systemic just means anywhere, sending blood anywhere except the lungs. So we're actually on slide 7. When blood goes through the chambers of the heart, when you're inside the right atrium or inside the right ventricle, the myocardium, the cells that are pumping, they're not getting any nutrients from the blood inside the chamber. They're just, at this point, the blood is just getting pushed. Cardiac muscle, myocardium, needs a lot of oxygen, needs a lot of nutrients, needs to get rid of waste. So you need to somehow deliver blood to them. Inside the right atrium, right ventricle, that blood anyways isn't oxygenated. But then even from the left atrium, left ventricle, once again, myocardium isn't getting any of the nutrients or oxygen. So how do you get nutrients and oxygen to the myocardium of the heart? The heart has its own set of blood vessels that are immediately surrounding it, that deliver oxygen and nutrients to the myocardium. The left ventricle, when you pump blood out, it goes out the aorta, and the aorta is really long. We'll get to that coming up. But here, out of the aorta, the first blood vessels to branch off of the aorta, you see these right here? These are coronary arteries, and they branch all over the heart. Now, of course, there's many branches. We'll go over some of the major ones. The first major one that we'll go over is this branch that starts here and comes off to the right within the coronary sinus. It's the right coronary artery. The right coronary artery passes between the right auricle and the pulmonary trunk. You can see that the pulmonary trunk has been cut. So yeah, it passes within that coronary sinus. This view of the heart, this top picture, this is an anterior view of the heart. The right coronary artery continues and wraps around the back, just like how the coronaries. Did I say sinus? I meant sinus is a vein. Sorry, I meant sulcus. It's within the coronary sulcus. So the right coronary artery within the coronary sulcus wraps around to the back. So here at the bottom, same heart posterior side, and here you can see wrapping around is again the right coronary artery. So the right coronary artery is providing nutrients to the right ventricle, right atrium. It's also providing, on the anterior side, it's also providing nutrients to the right atrium, right ventricle, and the posterior side. To further feed the posterior side, this right coronary artery, look at the bottom picture, the posterior view. This right coronary artery has a major branch that goes within that posterior interventricular sulcus. Let me color this orange. There's an artery that goes within the posterior interventricular sulcus. That's the posterior interventricular branch of the right coronary artery. You can just call it posterior interventricular branch. So it'll be really useful to know where these sulci are, the coronary sulcus, the posterior interventricular sulcus, because this is where you can also find blood vessels, major coronary arteries, and we'll see veins too. So that's the right coronary artery and its major branch, one of its major branches, the posterior interventricular branch. The left coronary artery, which I'll draw in pink, let's take a look again at the anterior view, starts also at the base of the aorta and goes within that coronary sinus. I'm sorry, sulcus. I just want to say sinus, but it's sulcus. Coronary sulcus. It's actually, the left coronary artery, just that first part, is actually pretty short. Let me trace it again. The left coronary artery passes right behind that pulmonary trunk, and it's that long, because then it branches into two major parts. One major part, I'll draw in yellow. One major branch is called the anterior interventricular branch. As you might hopefully guess, this branch of the left coronary artery goes within the anterior interventricular sulcus. So again, important to know these sulci. Here's another major artery passing in that sulcus. What's really cool about these arteries is that the anterior interventricular branch of the left coronary artery actually forms a connection. It directly connects to the posterior interventricular branch. These two are linked together. So take a look at the top right here. Right here, this point of the anterior interventricular branch connects with this point on the posterior interventricular branch. They form an anastomosis. Remember that word? They form an anastomosis. It's collateral circulation. We're ensuring that we get tons of blood to the heart. It's super essential we get constant flow of blood to the heart and heavy amounts of it. And just in case we need a detour, this is a detour. For example, I'm going to draw this in a highlighter blue. For example, let's say we want to get to this part of the heart on the anterior side. Can you see my highlighter? If we want to get to that part, but we're blocked off right here. Let's say there's a clot at the base of the anterior interventricular branch. What can we do? We can get blood to, I'll just draw this in red. We can get blood to go along the right coronary artery, wrap around, then go posterior interventricular branch, then wrap around to the front and get to that spot. Rewind that if you need to follow that again. But it provides us with an alternate route, having that anterior interventricular branch connect with the posterior interventricular branch, artery to artery, with no capillaries in between. The posterior interventricular branch, I should mention, does deliver blood to the posterior side of the heart, just like the anterior interventricular branch delivers blood to the anterior side of the heart. So there does branch to capillaries, but there is an artery to artery connection there. Let me clean this up a little bit. One more branch that's important to know for these arteries. One more branch to know, and I'm going to color this in bright blue. Look again at this top view, this anterior view of the heart. Here's that branching point of the left coronary artery. It's going to branch this way within the coronary sulcus. Except it's going to the left instead of the right. The right coronary artery is in the coronary sulcus on the right side. The circumflex branch of the left coronary artery is in the coronary sulcus on the left side. And look how it wraps around on the back. So we're getting blood to the left ventricle, both anterior side and posterior side. So we've hit all the major parts of the heart, as well as the left atrium, I should mention. So we've hit all the major parts of the heart. We're giving blood, we're giving oxygen, nutrients to all these major parts. All these blood vessels can branch to capillaries. And so now we have to return blood back through veins. There are three major veins that I'd like you to know. Three major veins. There's more than this, of course, but the ones I'd like you to know are here. The great cardiac vein is best seen from an anterior view. It delivers blood from the anterior side, and then it wraps around the back. So here it is on the posterior side. So the great cardiac vein is found in the anterior interventricular sulcus. Heading into the coronary sulcus. While the middle cardiac vein starts on the posterior side. It's not as long. The middle cardiac vein is in the posterior interventricular sulcus. There is a small cardiac vein. We're not going to go over that one, but those are the two major branches so far that you need to know. One's on the anterior side, one's on the posterior side. Both of these, you'll see that you see the cardiac vein ends right here. The middle cardiac vein ends right here. Both of these feed in to this major vein called the coronary sinus. Finally right now, coronary sinus. I'm going to erase my drawing here on the back on the posterior side so you can see it better. The coronary sinus is this larger blood vessel, larger vein that delivers blood into the right atrium. The coronary sinus drains into the right atrium. You've got the superior vena cava, you've got the inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus all draining blood into the right atrium. So the coronary sinus is found in the coronary sulcus, draining blood from the coronary circulation into the right atrium. Here's our schematic on the left. You can see that starting from the aorta, we could go to the right coronary artery, posterior interventricular branch to get to the posterior heart. Go to capillaries, come back on the middle cardiac vein, coronary sinus, right atrium. That's one circuit. We could go left coronary artery. If we want to stay on the anterior side, anterior interventricular branch, coronary capillaries, great cardiac vein, because that's on the anterior side, coronary sinus, right atrium. We could go left coronary artery, circumflex branch, coronary capillaries, great cardiac vein, coronary sinus, right atrium. But let's say there's a blockage at the right coronary artery, so we can't pass this way anymore, but we want to get blood to this region. What we could do is go from the aorta, left coronary artery, anterior interventricular branch, through that anastomosis to the posterior interventricular branch and reach that area, then come back on the posterior side. You can see the corresponding blood vessels here in the cadaver views of these hearts. Let's take a look at this in complete anatomy. Oh, sorry, let me just point out something real quick. Note how the pulmonary trunk on the right side in this top right picture. Notice how the pulmonary trunk is intact. So it's really hard to see. It's really hard to see the right coronary artery coming out of the aorta and the left coronary artery coming out of the aorta. But you have a right coronary, left coronary. And then the left coronary branches into the circumflex branch, and then the anterior interventricular branch. On the posterior side, here's that posterior interventricular branch coming from the right coronary artery. The great cardiac vein isn't shown here on the anterior side, but I'll just draw it in here. Wraps around middle cardiac vein coming up this way, and then the coronary sinus is this major blood vessel here leading into the right atrium. Let's switch to complete anatomy, so you can see this in 3 dimensions. I'm going to exit out of screen mode. Let's orient ourselves a little bit. This is the inferior vena cava. I'm sorry, superior. Here's the inferior vena cava. The right atrium, right ventricle. You can see the right coronary artery coming out of the base of the aorta. This is an anterior view of the heart. Right coronary artery coming out of the base. I'm going to clear my drawings. I'm going to spin it around. You can see how the right coronary artery continues on the posterior side. And then it branches in this posterior interventricular sulcus. This is the posterior interventricular branch of the right coronary artery. If I spin, so we can see the apex pointing down. If I spin the apex up, or I guess I can't really do that. So I'll just spin this heart around a little bit. You can see that here's that posterior, whoops. Here's that posterior interventricular branch. The anterior branch is going to come right here, and there's that connection. Here's the anastomosis connecting to the anterior interventricular branch. Let's come back on the anterior side. I'm going to hide, or at least fade, the left atrium because it's hard to see. It's hard to see the right or left coronary artery. Rotate this a little bit more. All right, I've faded some of the heart features so we can see the left coronary artery better. Here's the aorta. Here's the left coronary artery. And then the left coronary artery branches. Here's our anterior interventricular branch. And then the circumflex branch is hiding a little bit. It's kind of tucked in this coronary sulcus. This is the circumflex branch. And the circumflex branch, I'm going to clear this, wraps around on the posterior side. Oops. Sorry. We're in a posterior view right now, and the circumflex branch continues here on the posterior side and branches into capillaries. Those are the arteries. Let's go back to an anterior view. The veins. Here is our great cardiac vein. Comes up into the coronary sulcus and wraps around a bit. So it starts on anterior, wraps to posterior. Go to the other side. Here you can see the middle cardiac vein. So this comes up, and then both drain into this major blood vessel, and that is the coronary sinus. The coronary sinus found in the posterior coronary sulcus. I just want to prove to you that the coronary sinus drains to the right atrium. So let's rotate this a little bit. I'm going to hide this portion of the auricle of the right atrium so we can look inside. And you can see it there. Draining from here is the superior vena cava. Draining this way is the inferior vena cava, and then coronary sinus. Don't confuse the coronary sinus with the fossa ovalis. The fossa ovalis is just a depression, it's not a hole. Also, don't confuse it with the sinoatrial node or the atrioventricular node, which aren't visible just like this. All right, those are the blood vessels that I'd like you to know for coronary circulation. I'll see you in the next video for more circulatory pathways. Let me know if you have any questions. Take your time to go over these. I know that there's a lot of blood vessels to remember, so I highly recommend that you draw them out yourself. And when we get to lab, trace it to see where all these blood vessels are. All right. I'll see you in the next video.